The ancient church bells of St. Mary Magdalene rang out across the Norfolk countryside, their bronze voices carrying centuries of tradition on the crisp December air. As the first rays of Christmas morning sun pierced through the frost-covered trees of the Sandringham estate, a familiar ritual was about to unfold that would capture the hearts of millions around the world. Inside the grand walls of Sandringham House, members of the British royal family were preparing for what many consider the most authentic glimpse into their private world, the annual Christmas Day walk to church. This wasn't a state occasion filled with ceremonial pomp, nor a carefully choreographed public appearance. This was tradition in its purest form, a moment where the most famous family in Britain would step out among their neighbors, as they had done for over a century. But this particular Christmas will be different. Hidden beneath the familiar smiles and coordinated outfits lay untold stories of personal struggles, family tensions, and the weight of maintaining centuries-old customs in a rapidly changing world. As the Queen's estate stirred to life on this sacred morning, none of the gathering crowd outside the church gates could have imagined the profound human drama that would unfold in the hours to come. The cameras were ready, the crowds were gathering, and the royal family was about to embark on a journey that would reveal far more than anyone expected about duty, family, and the true meaning of Christmas in the modern age. The grandfather clock in the main hall of Sandringham House chimed 7 times, its deep resonant tones echoing through corridors that had witnessed more than a century of royal Christmas mornings. Queen Elizabeth II, now in her 96th year, sat by the window of her private sitting room, wrapped in a familiar tartan shawl that had belonged to her mother. The early morning light caught the frost patterns on the glass, creating delicate crystalline designs that seemed to dance before her eyes. This morning felt different somehow. Perhaps it was the weight of recent years, the losses that had carved deep furrows in her heart, or maybe it was simply the accumulated wisdom of nearly 7 decades on the throne. The Queen's fingers traced the edge of a silver-framed photograph on the side table beside her chair. Prince Philip smiled back at her from within the frame, captured during one of their many Christmas walks to church, his naval bearing still evident even in civilian clothes. Down the hallway, Prince William was helping his youngest son, Prince Louis, with the buttons on his formal coat. The 7-year-old was full of Christmas morning energy, chattering excitedly about the presents he had already unwrapped and the ones still waiting under the towering Christmas tree in the main drawing room. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, appeared in the doorway, elegant in a deep emerald coat that complemented her dark hair, now styled in soft waves that framed her face. "Are you ready, darling?" she asked William, though her eyes conveyed more than the simple question. They had discussed this morning at length the night before. This would be their first Christmas at Sandringham since becoming the Prince and Princess of Wales, a title change that carried enormous weight and responsibility. Every gesture, every smile, every interaction would be scrutinized by the media and the public alike. Princess Charlotte rushed past them in the corridor, her Christmas dress twirling around her as she moved with the graceful confidence that seemed to come naturally to her. At 8 years old, she already possessed an intuitive understanding of royal protocol, yet she maintained the innocent joy that made her such a favorite with the crowds who gathered to see the family each year. Prince George, now 10 and increasingly aware of his future role, walked more sedately behind his siblings. He had been asking more questions lately about what it meant to be second in line to the throne, questions that William found both heartening and heartbreaking. The boy deserved a normal childhood, yet the reality of his birthright was becoming impossible to ignore. In another wing of the house, King Charles III stood before his bathroom mirror, adjusting his tie with practiced precision. The weight of the crown, though not physically present this morning, seemed to rest heavily on his shoulders. This was his second Christmas as monarch, and while the previous year had been marked by the newness of his role, this year brought a different kind of pressure. The country was facing economic challenges, international tensions were high, and the monarchy itself continued to evolve in ways that sometimes felt overwhelming. His wife, Queen Camilla, entered the room quietly, her presence immediately bringing a sense of calm to the space. She had learned over the years to read her husband's moods, to sense when the burden of kingship weighed most heavily upon him. Without words, she straightened his collar and smoothed an invisible wrinkle from his jacket, her touch gentle and reassuring. "The weather is perfect for the walk," she said softly, though they both knew that royal duties continued regardless of weather conditions. It was her way of offering comfort, of reminding him that some things remained constant and manageable in a world that often felt anything but. The staff at Sandringham had been preparing for this day for weeks. Mrs. Henderson, the head housekeeper who had served the royal family for over 30 years, moved through the rooms with quiet efficiency, ensuring that every detail was perfect. The flowers in the hallways were fresh, the silver was polished to a mirror shine, and the traditional Christmas breakfast was being prepared in the kitchens below. She remembered the first Christmas she had worked at Sandringham, how nervous she had been, how overwhelming the responsibility had felt. Now, 3 decades later, she moved with the confidence that came from years of experience. Yet she never took for granted the privilege of serving during these intimate family moments. Outside, the security preparations were already well underway. Detective Inspector Sarah Matthews had arrived before dawn to coordinate with local Norfolk police and the Royal Protection Officers. The route from Sandringham House to St. Mary Magdalene Church was only a few hundred yards, but every inch had to be secured, every possible scenario considered and planned for. The crowds are beginning to gather despite the early hour and the December chill. Margaret Thompson, a retired teacher from nearby King's Lynn, had been coming to see the royal family's Christmas walk for over 20 years. She arrived each year with her thermos of hot tea and her folding chair, claiming the same spot along the path where she had the best view of the family as they made their way to church. "It never gets old," she told her friend Janet, who had joined her for the first time this year. "There's something magical about seeing them like this, just being a family on Christmas morning. It reminds you that underneath all the titles and ceremony, they're people just like us." Young Tommy Fletcher, age 9, pressed against the barriers with his parents, holding a small bouquet of flowers that his mother had helped him pick from their garden. He had been practicing what he would say if any of the royals stopped to speak with him, though his mother suspected that when the moment came, he would be too starstruck to remember any of his carefully rehearsed words. The media presence was, as always, significant but carefully managed. Royal photographers who had covered these Christmas walks for years knew exactly where to position themselves for the best shots, understanding the delicate balance between capturing newsworthy images and respecting the family's privacy during what was fundamentally a religious observance. James Morrison, a veteran royal correspondent for one of the major newspapers, adjusted his camera settings as he thought about the story he would write later that day. He had covered royal events for over 15 years, but he never lost sight of the human elements that made these occasions compelling. Today, he sensed there would be particular interest in how the family dynamics had evolved, how the newest generation was growing into their roles, and how the senior royals were navigating the challenges of modern monarchy. Back inside the house, the family was gathering in the main hall. The Queen emerged from her private apartments, leaning lightly on her walking stick but moving with determined purpose. Her outfit had been chosen weeks in advance. A rich purple coat with matching hat, pearls that had belonged to her grandmother Queen Mary, and a brooch that held particular significance for this Christmas day. Prince Harry's absence was felt keenly, though no one spoke of it directly. The empty space where he would have stood, the missing laughter that had once filled these corridors, created a silence that seemed to echo through the grand rooms. Yet the family had learned to carry on, to find joy and meaning in tradition even as the circle grew smaller. Princess Anne arrived with her characteristic punctuality, her no-nonsense approach to royal duties evident even in her Christmas morning demeanor. She greeted her mother with genuine warmth, their relationship having deepened over the years as they shared the burden of royal responsibilities. And children and grandchildren would join them for the walk, adding another generation to the continuing story of the House of Windsor. The younger royals, Prince Edward and his family, Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie with their husbands, and children completed the gathering. Each brought their own personality and energy to the group, creating the kind of multi-generational family dynamic that made these occasions feel both formal and intimate. As they prepared to leave for church, Queen Elizabeth took a moment to look around at her family assembled in the hall. These Christmas morning walks have become one of the most enduring and beloved royal traditions, a time when the public could see the monarchy not as an institution, but as a family united by faith, duty, and love. The double doors opened, and the crisp December air rushed into the warmth of the house. Outside, the sounds of the gathering crowd could be heard. Children laughing, cameras clicking, the general murmur of excited anticipation. It was time to begin the walk that would take them from the privacy of their family home into the public eye, where every step, every smile, every interaction would become part of the historical record. As they stepped out into the bright Christmas morning sunshine, none of them could have predicted that this walk would become one of the most memorable in the long history of royal Christmas traditions, marked not just by ceremony and protocol, but by moments of genuine human connection that would touch hearts around the world. Hashtag Royal Christmas Story. Second part, the moment the royal family emerged from Sandringham House. The atmosphere outside transformed completely. The excited chatter of the crowd rose to a cheerful crescendo, hundreds of voices calling out Christmas greetings and well wishes. Children were lifted on his shoulders for better views. Cameras were raised, and smartphones were held high to capture every precious moment of this beloved tradition. Queen Elizabeth stepped carefully onto the gravel path, her purple coat a vibrant splash of color against the winter landscape. Despite her age and the walking stick she now relied upon, there was something unmistakably regal about her bearing. She paused for just a moment, her keen eyes surveying the crowd with the practiced gaze of someone who had been meeting her subjects for nearly 7 decades. King Charles fell in a step beside his mother, offering his arm for additional support, though she had not asked for it. The gesture was subtle, respectful, and spoke volumes about their evolving relationship. Where once he had been the heir waiting in the wings, he was now the monarch ensuring that his mother's final public appearances were conducted with dignity and grace. The pathway from the house to the church was lined with Norfolk police officers, their breath visible in small white puffs in the cold air. Behind them, the crowd pressed forward eagerly, but respectfully, held back by temporary barriers that had been erected before dawn. The distance to St. Mary Magdalene was short, perhaps a quarter-mile, but the royal family always walked slowly, taking time to acknowledge the people who had come see them. Prince William guided his 3 children with the practiced ease of a father who understood the unique pressures they faced. Princess Charlotte walked between her parents, her small gloved hand clasped firmly in her mother's. The young princess had developed an innate sense of when to wave to the crowd and when to focus straight ahead, a skill that impressed even the most seasoned royal watchers. Prince George maintained his position slightly behind his parents, his serious expression betraying none of the excitement he surely felt. At 10 years old, he was beginning to understand the weight of expectations that came with his place in the line of succession. Yet he still possessed enough childlike wonder to be amazed by the sheer number of people who had come to see his family. Prince Louis, the youngest at 7, was less constrained by protocol. His eyes darted everywhere, taking in the colorful decorations, the friendly faces, and the general festive atmosphere. When someone in the crowd called out, "Merry Christmas, Louis," he turned and waved enthusiastically, earning delighted cheers from nearby spectators and knowing smiles from his parents. Catherine moved with the grace that had made her one of the most photographed women in the world, yet there was nothing artificial about her demeanor. She genuinely enjoyed these public interactions, finding real pleasure in the conversations she had with the people who came to see them. Her background, growing up in a middle-class family, had given her an authenticity in these moments that resonated deeply with the public. As they progressed along the path, individual members of the crowd began to catch the attention of different royals. Margaret Thompson, in her familiar spot with her folding chair and thermos, raised her hand tentatively. Queen Elizabeth noticed the gesture and moved toward the barrier, accepting the small posy of flowers that Margaret had brought. 22 years I've been coming, Your Majesty, Margaret said, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. You've been such a constant in all our lives. The Queen's response was quiet, meant only from Margaret's ears, but the genuine warmth in her expression was visible to everyone nearby. These personal moments, repeated dozens of times during the short walk, were what made the Christmas tradition so special for both the royal family and the public. Detective Inspector Sarah Matthews watched from her position near the church, her trained eyes constantly scanning the crowd while appearing relaxed and festive. After years of coordinating security for these events, she had developed an almost supernatural ability to spot potential problems while allowing the family to interact naturally with their well-wishers. Young Tommy Fletcher, clutching his bouquet of garden flowers, found himself directly in Prince William's path as the family approached his section of the crowd. His carefully rehearsed words completely abandoned him as the Prince of Wales stopped directly in front of him, crouching down at Tommy's eye level. "Those are beautiful flowers," William said, accepting the bouquet with genuine appreciation. "Did you grow them yourself?" Tommy managed to nod, though no words would come. His mother, standing behind him, beamed with pride and slight embarrassment at her son's uncharacteristic silence. William understood completely, having been in similar situations countless times as a child himself. "What's your name?" William continued, his voice gentle and encouraging. "Tommy," the boy finally managed to whisper. "Well, Tommy, thank you very much for these flowers. I know my wife will love them." William stood and handed the bouquet to Catherine, who accepted them with equal graciousness before turning back to Tommy. "They smell wonderful," she said, inhaling the fragrance. "You must have a green thumb." The brief interaction lasted perhaps 30 seconds, but for Tommy and his family, it would become a treasured memory that would be recounted for years to come. For the royal couple, it was simply part of the natural rhythm of these public appearances, yet they never forgot that for the people they met, these moments were extraordinary. Princess Anne moved through her section of the crowd with characteristic efficiency, yet her interactions were no less meaningful for being brief. She had a particular gift for making quick connections with people, often remembering faces and details from previous encounters that amazed those who met her. An elderly veteran, wearing his military medals on his coat despite the cold, caught her attention. She approached him directly, recognizing the insignia of a regiment with which she had been involved in her capacity as Colonel-in-Chief. "Thank you for your service," she said simply, but the words carried weight coming from someone who had dedicated her entire life to public service. The veteran straightened to attention instinctively, his eyes bright with pride and gratitude. Queen Camilla had initially found these public walkabouts intimidating, but she had grown into the role with grace and confidence. She had a particular warmth with children and elderly people, often spending extra time with those who seemed nervous or overwhelmed by the occasion. A group of nursing students from nearby Norfolk University had positioned themselves along the route, and Camilla stopped to speak with them about their studies. As someone who had worked in healthcare advocacy for years, she was genuinely interested in their experiences and plans for their careers. "The work you're doing is so important," she told them, "especially after everything we've all been through in recent years. Thank you for choosing to care for others." The students were initially starstruck, but Camilla's genuine interest in their answers soon had them chatting naturally about their studies and their hopes for the future. It was exactly the kind of interaction that made these events special, moving beyond mere celebrity spotting to real human connection. The pace of the walk was deliberately slow, allowing for these interactions while ensuring that the elderly queen was not overtaxed by the effort. The family had long since mastered the art of appearing relaxed and unhurried while actually maintaining a careful schedule that would get them to the church in time for the service. Local residents who had lived in the area for decades pointed out changes to visitors, sharing stories of previous Christmas walks they had witnessed. The tradition had evolved over the years, but its essential character remained unchanged. It was a moment when the most formal monarchy in the world showed its most human face. The media coverage was extensive but respectful, with photographers capturing both the formal moments and the spontaneous interactions. The images would appear in newspapers around the world within hours, but the focus remained on the family's genuine engagement with the public rather than on manufactured drama or controversy. As they neared the church, the crowd grew denser, with people who had arrived later in the morning adding to the throng. The excitement was palpable, but it was a joyful excitement, filled with Christmas spirit and genuine affection for the royal family. Church bells had been ringing throughout their walk, the ancient bronze voices of Saint Mary Magdalene calling the faithful to worship, just as they had for centuries. The sound created a perfect soundtrack for the procession, linking this modern Christmas morning to countless others that had come before. The final approach to the church would bring new challenges and new opportunities for connection, as the family prepared to transition from their public walk to the more private moments of religious worship that lay ahead. The ancient stone walls of St. Mary Magdalene Church rose before them, like a beacon of continuity in an ever-changing world. The medieval building, with its flint walls and distinctive tower, had witnessed royal worship for over a century, serving as the spiritual heart of the Sandringham estate and the Norfolk community that surrounded it. As the royal family approached the final stretch before the church entrance, the crowd's energy reached its peak. Children waved miniature Union Jacks that their parents had brought, while others held handmade Christmas cards and drawings they hoped to give to their favorite royals. The scene was a kaleidoscope of winter coats, bright scarves, and smiling faces, all united by the shared experience of witnessing this beloved tradition. Queen Elizabeth paused just outside the church gate, turning to acknowledge the crowd with a gentle wave. Her gesture was met with a spontaneous burst of applause and calls of "God save the Queen" that seemed to echo across the Norfolk countryside. Even in her advanced years, she possessed an innate understanding of these moments, knowing exactly when to acknowledge the public's presence and when to continue forward. The Reverend Canon Jonathan Riviere, the rector of St. Mary Magdalene, waited at the church entrance in his flowing Christmas vestments. He had been preparing for this service for weeks, not just the logistics of accommodating the royal family and the media attention, but the spiritual significance of leading worship for one of the most recognizable families in the world. Canon Riviere had served this parish for 8 years, and he had come to know the royal family not as distant celebrities, but as genuine members of his congregation. He had witnessed their faith during difficult times, their commitment to the church community, and their desire for authentic spiritual experience despite the circus that often surrounded their public appearances. As King Charles approached the church entrance, he and Canon Riviere exchanged warm greetings that spoke to a relationship built over years of shared faith and mutual respect. Charles had been confirmed in the Church of England as a young man, and his role as supreme governor of the church was more than ceremonial to him. It represented a deep personal commitment to the spiritual life of the nation. "Merry Christmas, Your Majesty," Canon Riviere said, his voice carrying both formality and genuine warmth. "And to you, Canon," Charles replied. "I'm looking forward to your sermon this morning. I understand you've prepared something special for Christmas Day." The brief exchange was typical of Charles's approach to his royal duties. He genuinely cared about the details, the people involved, and the spiritual content of the occasions he attended. It was an approach that had sometimes been misunderstood earlier in his life, but was now widely appreciated as he had grown into his role as monarch. Prince William and Catherine followed close behind, their children now showing the first signs of the long mourning beginning to take its toll. Prince Louis, in particular, was starting to fidget, though he maintained the basic decorum that had been carefully taught to all the royal children from their earliest years. The church itself was already nearly full, with local parishioners occupying most of the wooden pews. These were not tourists or royal watchers, but members of the community who had been worshiping at St. Mary Magdalene long before the royal family arrived, and would continue to do so long after they departed. Their presence provided an authentic foundation for the service that elevated it beyond mere spectacle. Mrs. Eleanor Whitfield, aged 87, had been a regular at the Christmas Day service for over 60 years. She remembered the first time she had seen the young Princess Elizabeth attend church at Sandringham, and the memory still brought tears to her eyes. Now, decades later, she watched as that same woman, now Queen, slowly made her way down the aisle with the dignity that had defined her entire reign. "She looks tired," Mrs. Whitfield whispered to her daughter, who had accompanied her to the service. "But she's still here, still doing her duty." The observation was both tender and profound. The Queen's commitment to this Christmas tradition, even in her 96th year, spoke to something fundamental about her character and her understanding of duty. She could easily have chosen to attend a private service at Sandringham House, but she continued to make the public walk, continued to meet her subjects, continued to demonstrate that the monarchy remained connected to the people it served. The interior of St. Mary Magdalene was decorated beautifully for Christmas, with garlands of holly and ivy adorning the ancient stone pillars and a magnificent Christmas tree standing near the altar. The decorations were traditional and elegant, reflecting both the sacred nature of the occasion and the historical significance of the building. Canon Riviere had chosen the music carefully, selecting hymns that would be familiar to the congregation while also reflecting the Christmas message of hope and renewal. The church organist, Mrs. Patricia Holmes, had been practicing for weeks to ensure that everything would be perfect for this most important service of the year. As the royal family took their places in the front pews, the congregation settled into the respectful quiet that preceded the formal beginning of worship. The media presence was minimal inside the church, with only a few carefully selected photographers permitted to document the service, and even they were restricted to specific locations that would not interfere with the worship experience. Princess Charlotte sat between her parents, her prayer book open to the correct page, though at 8 years old she still needed occasional guidance to follow along with the service. Her serious concentration on the proceedings impressed the adults around her, demonstrating the careful religious education she was receiving as part of her preparation for her future role. Prince George, seated beside his grandfather King Charles, was beginning to show real understanding of the liturgy and the meaning behind the words they were speaking and singing together. His questions about faith and duty had become more sophisticated recently, and Charles took particular pleasure in these conversations with his eldest grandson. Queen Camilla followed the service with quiet devotion, her prayer book marked with passages that held special meaning for her. Her journey to this moment had been long and sometimes difficult, marked by public scrutiny and personal challenges, but her faith had remained a constant source of strength throughout. The congregation included not just the royal family and local parishioners, but also many of the estate workers and their families. These were the people who maintained Sandringham throughout the year, who ensured that the house and ground were ready for the royal family's visits, and who formed the backbone of the community that surrounded the estate. George Patterson, the head groundskeeper, sat with his wife and teenage children near the middle of the church. He had worked on the estate for over 20 years, maintaining the gardens and grounds that provided the stunning backdrop for occasions like this morning's walk. His presence in the congregation represented the deep connection between the royal family and the people who served them, a relationship based on mutual respect and shared commitment to preserving this special place. As Canon Riviere began the opening prayers, his voice filled the ancient building with words that had been spoken in this same space for centuries. The prayers were both timeless and immediate, addressing the eternal themes of Christmas while acknowledging the specific challenges and blessings of this particular moment in history. The service proceeded with the measured pace that characterized traditional Anglican worship, each element carefully planned and executed with reverence for both the religious significance of the occasion and the presence of the royal family. Yet there was nothing artificial or performative about the worship. It was genuine devotion taking place in a setting made sacred by centuries of prayer and praise. During the Bible readings, Queen Elizabeth followed along in her personal prayer book, its pages marked and annotated from decades of use. The book had been with her through countless services, both public and private, serving as a tangible connection to her faith and to the spiritual foundation that had sustained her throughout her long reign. The Christmas hymns rose from the congregation with particular power and beauty, voices joining together in praise that transcended social boundaries and royal protocol. In these moments, the Queen was simply another member of the congregation, her voice blending with those around her in celebration of the Christmas message. Children throughout the church sang with the enthusiastic volume that made adult parishioners smile, their voices adding a note of pure joy to the ancient words. Among them, the three Cambridge children contributed their own voices, Princess Charlotte singing with particular enthusiasm, while Prince Louis tried his best to follow along with words that were still challenging for his 7-year-old reading skills. As the service continued toward its climax with the Christmas sermon, the sense of community and shared faith became even more pronounced. This was more than a royal appearance or a media event. It was a genuine worship experience that would remain in the hearts and memories of everyone present long after the cameras had departed and the crowds had dispersed, of delivering sermons to congregations both ordinary and extraordinary. His Christmas Day message had been crafted with particular care, knowing that his words would reach far beyond the stone walls of St. Mary Magdalene. Yet his focus remained on the spiritual significance of the day, the message of hope and renewal that Christmas brought to believers around the world. Christmas, he began, his voice carrying clearly through the ancient church, is ultimately about the extraordinary entering into the ordinary, about divine love choosing to manifest itself in the most humble circumstances in a stable, among the forgotten and overlooked. Queen Elizabeth listened with the deep attention she had always given to religious instruction, her faith having been the bedrock of her life and reign. The sermon's themes resonated particularly strongly with her own experience of trying to serve something greater than herself, of finding meaning and purpose and duty that was both burden and blessing. The canon's words about service and sacrifice seemed to speak directly to the royal family situation. True leadership, he continued, is not about wielding power, but about wielding love. Not about being served, but about serving. The Christmas story teaches us that the greatest among us will be those who make themselves least, who put the needs of others before their own comfort and convenience. King Charles found himself deeply moved by these words, thinking of his mother's lifetime of service and his own evolving understanding of what it meant to serve as monarch in the 21st century. The challenges facing the nation and the world seemed overwhelming at times, yet the Christmas message offered perspective that transcended immediate political and economic concerns. Prince William held Catherine's hand as they listened, both of them acutely aware that their own service was just beginning. The future stretched before them, filled with responsibilities they were still learning to navigate, but moments like this provided spiritual foundation for the journey ahead. The children listened with varying degrees of attention, Prince George following the sermon with genuine interest, while Princess Charlotte and Prince Louis found their attention, occasionally wandering to the beautiful stained glass windows that caught the winter sunlight streaming through them. Mrs. Whitfield, the elderly parishioner who had attended Christmas services at St. Mary Magdalene for 6 decades, felt tears gathering in her eyes as Canon Riviere spoke about the continuity of faith across generations. She thought of her late husband, of children and grandchildren who were now scattered across the world, of the countless Christmas mornings that had brought both joy and sorrow over the years. The sermon touched on themes that resonated with every member of the congregation, regardless of their social position or personal circumstances. Canon Riviere spoke of finding hope in difficult times, of the importance of family and community, of the responsibility each person carried to make the world a better place through small acts of kindness, and large commitments to justice. "The royal family," he said, making direct reference to their presence for the first time, "provides us with an example of service that spans generations. But we are all called to be royal in our own way, to recognize the divine dignity that resides within every human being, to treat each other as princes and princesses in the kingdom of God." The words created a moment of profound connection between the royal family and the congregation, acknowledging their unique position while also emphasizing the shared humanity that united everyone present in the church. It was exactly the kind of message that made these Christmas services so meaningful for both the family and the community. As the sermon concluded, the congregation joined together for the final hymns of the service. "O come, all ye faithful," filled the ancient building with joyful sound, voices ranging from the trained clarity of the church choir to the enthusiastic, if imperfect, contributions of young children throughout the pews. Queen Elizabeth's voice, though quieter now than in years past, still carried the melody with confidence born of decades of singing these same hymns in the same place. Each Christmas at Sandringham had added layers of memory and meaning to these familiar words, creating a rich tapestry of worship that connected this moment to countless others that had come before. The final blessing brought the formal service to a close, but the sense of community and shared experience lingered as the congregation began to file out of the church. Canon Riviere positioned himself at the door to greet parishioners as they departed, a tradition that allowed him to connect personally with members of his flock and to gauge their response to the morning's worship. The royal family remained seated for a few additional minutes, allowing the majority of the congregation to depart before they made their own exit. This practical consideration helped manage the crowds that would inevitably gather outside the church, while also showing respect for the local parishioners who formed the heart of the church community. During these quiet moments, Queen Elizabeth often found herself reflecting on the service they had just experienced. The familiar liturgy, the beautiful music, and the inspiring sermon combined to create exactly the kind of spiritual foundation she had always sought for herself and her family during the Christmas season. Prince Louis, tired from the long morning but still fascinated by his surroundings, whispered questions to his father about the stained glass windows, the wooden pews, and the various ceremonial elements he had observed during the service. William answered patiently, remembering his own childhood questions during similar occasions and appreciating his son's genuine curiosity about faith and worship. Princess Anne sat quietly, her own thoughts turning to family members who were absent from this year's service. The royal family had experienced significant changes in recent years, losses that had left empty spaces in the pews and in their hearts. Yet the continuity of faith and tradition provided comfort and context for these changes, reminding them that they were part of something larger and more enduring than any individual life. As they prepared to leave the church, the family knew that the second half of their Christmas Day public appearance awaited them outside. The crowd would have grown larger during the service, and there would be more opportunities for interaction, more moments of connection with the people who had come to share in this tradition. But first, they paused for a moment of gratitude for the worship they had just experienced. These moments of authentic spiritual reflection were becoming increasingly precious as the demands of royal duty grew more complex and the world around them became more chaotic. Canon Riviere approached the front pew to thank the royal family for their presence and to exchange Christmas greetings. These brief conversations after the service had become one of his favorite parts of the morning, offering an opportunity to connect with the family members on a more personal level about matters of faith and community life. "Thank you for that beautiful sermon, Canon," Queen Elizabeth said, her words carrying genuine appreciation. "Your message about service was particularly meaningful this morning." The exchange was brief but heartfelt, representing the kind of authentic relationship that had developed between the royal family and the church community over years of shared worship and mutual respect. As they stood to leave the church, the sound of the waiting crowd could be heard through the ancient stone walls. Children's voices, adults calling Christmas greetings, and the general buzz of excited conversation all indicated that the public portion of their Christmas morning was far from over. The transition from the sacred space of worship to the public arena of royal duty was one that each family member had learned to navigate with grace and authenticity. They carried the spiritual strength they had gained from the service with them as they prepared to continue serving their people in a uniquely public way that defined their royal role. The church doors opened to reveal a scene that had transformed dramatically during the hour-long service. The crowd outside St. Mary Magdalene had nearly doubled in size, with families arriving from across Norfolk and beyond to catch a glimpse of the royal family's departure. The winter sun had climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the churchyard and illuminating the excited faces of hundreds of well-wishers. Queen Elizabeth emerged first, pausing at the top of the church steps to survey the gathered crowd. The sight of so many people who had chosen to spend part of their Christmas morning in this way never failed to move her deeply. After nearly 7 decades on the throne, she remained genuinely touched by the devotion and affection of her subjects, particularly during these intimate family occasions. The crowd erupted in spontaneous applause and Christmas greetings as they saw her, their voices creating a joyful chorus that seemed to echo across the Norfolk countryside. Children waved enthusiastically while adults called out "Merry Christmas" and "God Save the Queen" with genuine warmth and affection. King Charles appeared beside his mother, offering his arm as they descended the church steps together. The gesture was both practical and symbolic, representing the careful balance of supporting the Queen while respecting her independence and dignity. Their relationship had evolved beautifully over the years, from heir and monarch to son, and mothers sharing the burdens and joys of royal duty. Prince William and Catherine followed with their 3 children, each family member now energized by the spiritual experience they had just shared and ready for the second phase of their Christmas morning public appearance. The walk back to Sandringham House would provide additional opportunities for interaction with the crowd, different from their earlier journey to church because of the changed dynamics after worship. Princess Charlotte seemed particularly confident as they emerged from the church, her posture and bearing reflecting the poise that had been carefully nurtured since her earliest public appearances. She had developed an intuitive sense of when to wave, when to smile, and when to focus straight ahead, skills that would serve her well throughout her life of public service. Prince George walked slightly behind his parents, his serious expression softened by occasional shy smiles when members of the crowd called out his name. At 10 years old, he was beginning to understand the weight of expectations that came with being second in line to the throne, yet he maintained the natural dignity that suggested he would grow into his role with grace. Prince Louis, despite the long mourning, remained energetic and curious about everything happening around him. His spontaneous reactions to the crowd continued to delight observers, providing moments of genuine joy that reminded everyone present of the human side of royal duty. The return journey to Sandringham House took a different route, allowing the family to interact with sections of the crowd they had not met during their morning walk to church. This careful planning ensured that as many people as possible would have the opportunity to see the royals up close and perhaps even exchange a few words. Margaret Thompson, the retired teacher who had been attending Christmas Day services for over 20 years, found herself positioned along the return route. As Queen Elizabeth approached her section of the barriers, Margaret held up a small Christmas card that her grandchildren had made specifically for the occasion. "This is for my grandchildren, Your Majesty," Margaret said, her voice trembling with emotion. "They wanted you to know how much you mean to our family." The Queen accepted the card graciously, taking a moment to examine the children's artwork and handwritten message. "Please give them my thanks," she replied. "It's beautiful work." The exchange lasted perhaps 30 seconds, but for Margaret and her grandchildren, it represented the culmination of years of tradition and devotion. These personal moments, repeated dozens of times during the walk, were what made the Christmas tradition so meaningful for both the royal family and the public. A group of Ukrainian refugees who had been resettled in the Norfolk area had gathered along the route, holding a banner with Christmas greetings written in both Ukrainian and English. Queen Camilla, who had been particularly involved in supporting refugee assistance programs, stopped to speak with them directly. "How are you finding life here in Norfolk?" she asked through an interpreter who had volunteered to assist the group. The families shared their gratitude for the welcome they had received in Britain and their hope for peace in their homeland. The conversation was brief, but deeply meaningful, representing the kind of personal diplomacy that made the royal family's role so important in connecting Britain to the wider world. Prince William and Catherine were drawn to a group of young people from a local charity that supported mental health initiatives in rural communities. As patrons of numerous mental health organizations, they were genuinely interested in learning about the challenges and successes the group had experienced in their work. "The countryside can be isolating for young people," one of the volunteers explained. "But we found that programs bringing people together for outdoor activities and peer support make a real difference." Catherine, who had been particularly focused on early childhood mental health in her royal work, asked thoughtful questions about their approach and offered encouragement for their continued efforts. These conversations, though brief, provided valuable insights that would inform her ongoing charitable work. An elderly gentleman wearing his military medals caught Princess Anne's attention as she passed his section of the crowd. She approached him directly, recognizing the insignia of the Royal Navy and the campaign medals that told the story of his service during the Cold War era. "Where did you serve?" she asked, her knowledge of military matters allowing her to engage in meaningful conversation about his experiences. The veteran's face lit up as he described his years aboard various Royal Navy ships, and Princess Anne listened with genuine interest, asking questions that demonstrated her deep respect for military service and her understanding of naval history. Prince Edward and his family, including his children Lady Louise Windsor and James, Earl of Wessex, had their own interactions with the crowd. As the youngest of Queen Elizabeth's children, Edward often flew somewhat under the radar, but his commitment to royal duties and his genuine warmth with the public were evident in every conversation. The Duke of Edinburgh's award scheme, which Edward had championed for years, was represented among the crowd by several young people who had completed various levels of the program. They shared their experiences with Edward and expressed their gratitude for the opportunities the award had provided them to develop leadership skills and confidence. As the family neared Sandringham House, the crowds began to thin somewhat, though many people followed the route, hoping for a final glimpse or interaction. The energy remained high, with Christmas carols being sung by various groups and children calling out excitedly whenever they spotted their favorite royals. The grounds of Sandringham House came into view, the grand Norfolk estate that had served as a private retreat for the royal family for over 150 years. The house itself, with its distinctive Jacobean architecture and beautiful gardens, provided a stunning backdrop for the conclusion of their public Christmas morning appearance. Mrs. Henderson, the head housekeeper, watched from the house as the family approached, already planning the smooth transition from their public duties to the private Christmas celebrations that would fill the rest of their day. The traditional Christmas lunch, family gift exchange, and other private moments awaited them inside the warmth of the house. As they reached the gates of Sandringham House, Queen Elizabeth turned once more to acknowledge the crowd that had followed them home. Her wave was met with a final chorus of Christmas greetings and applause, a fitting end to a morning that had perfectly captured the balance between royal duty and human connection that defined the monarchy at its best. The family paused at the entrance to their home, taking a moment to appreciate the morning they had just shared with their people. The Christmas Day walk to church had once again proven its enduring power to bring together monarch and subjects in a spirit of faith, community, and shared celebration. As they disappeared through the doors of Sandringham House, the crowd began to disperse slowly, many people lingering to share their experiences with friends and family. Children compared the waves they had received, adults discussed the conversations they had witnessed, and everyone carried away memories of a Christmas morning that had reminded them of the best qualities of both the royal family and the British people. The ancient bells of St. Mary Magdalene continued to ring out across the Norfolk countryside, their bronze voices carrying the joy and hope of Christmas morning far beyond the boundaries of the estate. The tradition would continue next year, as it had for generations past, connecting the timeless message of Christmas to the evolving story of the British monarchy and the people they served. Inside Sandringham House, the royal family gathered for the private celebrations that would fill the rest of Christmas Day, but the memories of their mourning among their subjects would remain with them throughout the holiday and beyond. These moments of genuine connection with the public were what made their service meaningful, reminding them always of the human faces and hearts behind the title of Her Majesty's subjects and the profound responsibility they carried to serve with dignity, grace, and authentic care for all their people.